All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Infant Health Equity Supplement Funding webinar today. We're very excited to have you back again after our kickoff call earlier this month. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so today we'll begin with some housekeeping, then a welcome from DHSPS. We will then hear a presentation from Dr. Arthur James around infant health equity. And we'll have a group discussion based on that presentation. We'll next hear an environmental scan overview from Ken Harris, break out into some groups to do an environmental scan exercise. Then Nikki Maffei will end with some information on creating a shared vision, and we'll move into next steps as we move forward in this project. All right, in terms of meeting logistics, the session is being recorded and will be posted for future viewing. All participants are muted upon entry, and we ask that you please remain muted during the presentations to limit background noise. You are, however, encouraged to participate in the discussion by typing your comments or questions into the chat box. In terms of connecting to audio conference, if you can hear me now, you're likely connected correctly, but we'll do a quick review. So you join the meeting by clicking the link that was sent to you upon registering for today's meeting. An audio conference box will appear. If you don't see that box appear, just click join audio. You can join by either phone call or computer audio. If you'd like to join by computer audio, just click computer audio. You should be all set. If you'd like to join by phone call, dial the given number, dial the given meeting ID and press pound, then enter your given participant ID and press pound. Next, in terms of the chat box, you'll see a toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Click the chat button. This will pop up a chat box to the right side of your screen. Make sure that you're typing in your questions and comments and sending to everyone so that we can all see them throughout the webinar. We will also be engaging you through the Poll Everywhere platform today. So in order to use Poll Everywhere, you want to text the message Healthy Start 428 to the number 22333 as you see on the screen. You'll just have to do this once, and then you'll be entered in the Poll Everywhere for this session. A couple notes on Poll Everywhere. Capitalization doesn't matter, but spelling and spaces do. Again, you only have to text that Healthy Start 428 the first time. After that, normal text messages in response to our polls. If texting doesn't work or you don't have your phone nearby, you can also visit pollev.com/healthystart428 and respond via your web browser. Finally, there are no charges to your cell phone beyond what your phone carrier typically charges for text messages. All right, and with that, I think we are going to move our welcome from DHSPS a little bit later in the presentation. Nikki, can I hand it to you?
Yeah, Melody will be able to jump on it a little bit later.
Like she just came in.
Oh, great. Nothing like putting someone right on the spot. But Melody, I think that you have joined us. We just hit this slide. I let folks know you were going to be a little bit late, but do you have any words of welcome that you'd like to give to the group?
Hello.
Hey, Melody.
Hey, I'm sorry I'm joining a few minutes late here, but just wanted to thank everyone for joining today, and then also just wanted to share that we're excited to host these webinars with all of the IHE supplement recipients, and the information that will be shared is going to be very helpful for you all in conducting those environmental scans, convening your CAN, and really developing action plans that speak to some of the social and structural determinants of health that are impacting infant mortality. So again, we are looking closely at this particular supplement and the activities that are going to be done under this resource, and we're hoping to just really make sure that we support you all in this effort so that we can receive high quality action plans that you all will be able to implement. So I will again welcome you, and I encourage you to get as much as possible out of these opportunities, and I'll turn it back over to Nishki.
Thanks so much, Melody. And again, welcome everyone. I would like to just get right in and introduce Art James, Dr. Art James. And many of you know Art Art is a friend of Healthy Start, an advocate of Healthy Start, and just an advocate of women, children and families, and family health. We're happy to have him as a subject matter expert under the TA and Support Center. And then specifically, he's supporting us with the IHE supplements as well as a subject matter expert. And he's today will be providing really a ground setting us for these webinars, but also for the work that you're embarking on and many of you are part of already, and just making that connection. And so he will do that level setting and grounding of us today. And I won't say too much more and just let him have the time that he needs. And so Art, I would like to pass it off to you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, if you guys, I know we tried it earlier, but right now I'm being told I can't. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So I have to tell you guys that I'm very excited about this opportunity. I think IHE has a chance to prove to the nation that the inequities that occur in the opportunity to survive the first year of life do not have to exist. I've been warned by the staff at NICHQ that I have too many slides for the time period that I'm allotted. I think that is a reflection of my enthusiasm for being able to share some thoughts with you this afternoon. So kind of consider this like you might read a newspaper. For some of the slides, we're gonna hit the headlines and not go into the fine print too much so that I can stay within the time frame allotted. I don't have any significant disclosures to make. I have some pretty aggressive objectives. Important to me is that you understand that while this presentation will concentrate on Black-white infant mortality disparities, the intent is to be able to use this as a template for how you might address disparities in your locations, be it on the basis of geography, rural versus urban, or by race. I'm a retired obstetrician, gynecologist, and pediatrician. I've been practicing now or advocating for about 35 years. And some of the more important lessons that I've learned is that the racial disparity in birth outcomes, in my opinion, is the most problematic maternal-child health challenge facing this nation. And so this project to me is extremely important. That race is a social construct, it's not a biological construct. And so as such, we need to refute this whole notion that it's race that accounts for the differences that we experience in maternal and infant morbidity and mortality. In my opinion, where race is concerned, racism, both historical and contemporary, is the root cause. And if the eradication of racism was up to Black people or people of color, it would have been resolved a long time ago. The government agencies and white organizations and white people need to be willing to co-lead the effort to dismantle racism. I mentioned this from the very beginning because for many of you, I hope that you share in this recognition and that it becomes a part of your projects. I've mentioned this already, that I'm hoping this conversation that concentrates on the Black-white disparity will be used as a template. So why this interest in disparities in general and specifically why investigate infant mortality? One slide. I want to start by looking back as far as 1985 at the report by Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler, who noted at the time that people of color had not benefited fully or equitably from the advances made in medicine. That report went on to show that there were as many as 60,000 excess deaths occurring to minority groups, that 80% of those deaths were in the 6 areas listed here, infant mortality included in them. In 2002, Institute of Medicine published this study called Unequal Treatment that showed that even when insurance and income were the same as whites, that minorities often receive fewer tests and less sophisticated treatment for a number of ailments. David Williams, who was a member of that Institute of Medicine group, said to us that Considerable evidence suggests that these striking racial differences in health and their persistence over time reflect in large part policies and practices that are linked to the historic legacy of racism, and that legacy has created living conditions that are pathogenic for minority populations. Former Surgeon General and Health and Human Services Secretary David Satcher, along with others, in 2005 presented this study where they challenged us, asking, what if we were equal? What if there was no disparity in, for example, the opportunity to live? That study showed that there were 83,000 excess deaths per year amongst African Americans using 2002 data. But that's older data. So if we look more recently, a study that was just published last month that looked at data from 2019, so this is essentially pre-COVID data. If you look at these dots on this slide, each of them representing 10 deaths. By age, this is the death distribution for white people in the United States during 2019. This slide shows the excess number of deaths to Black people by age during that same year. So that about 20% of those deaths were considered excess. And significant for us is the following, that by age, all age groups, the most excess deaths that occurred at any age occurred during the first year of life, where in 2019, it's estimated that 3,600 Black babies would still be alive if the Black infant mortality rate was the same as the white infant mortality rate. So let's dive into our conversation this afternoon. You all know the definition of infant mortality, the death of any live-born baby prior to his or her first birthday. But it's also this information on the right side of this slide that is important to me that you understand. That worldwide, it's the most sensitive index we have for social well-being, for social welfare. And regarding your projects, please understand that your infant mortality rates are a mirror, community mirror for where you live. It tells us about your community's perspective on saving the lives of all babies. The Secretary's Advisory Committee on Infant Mortality in 2013 said to us that the contributors are multifactorial, that they not only include high quality health care, but as you can see 2 through 5 on this slide that represent social determinants. And then there is this paragraph at the end of this slide that is important for us to understand, and especially for this project, that the persistence of these disparities tell us about our commitment to the health and well-being of all women, children, and families. As you all know, where infant mortality is concerned, the time of death, the most prevalent time of death is during that first month of life, the first 27 days of life, and the most common contributors are preterm birth and congenital anomalies from 28 days to 1 year. Post-neonatal deaths occur, and the most common contributor are sleep-related deaths. With that as background, let's dive into looking at 3 different characteristics of our national infant mortality data. What I want to look at is the disparity or inequity ratio, the survival time lag, and how we've done in terms of achieving healthy people goals. And again, I will remind you that while this portion of the data presentation will concentrate on Black-white differences, I would encourage you to utilize this as a template for describing circumstances in your state, and if you can find data far back enough for in your jurisdictions to help make your case for why this stuff needs to improve. So we're going to look at data from 1980 to 2019, 40 years worth of data, a reliable period of time to establish dependable trends. And we can see that during this period of time, the overall infant mortality rate decreased by almost 56%. But in 2019, we still had about 21,000 infant deaths. 21,000 infant deaths. Think about that in terms of a jumbo jet that carries about 400 people. Those 21,000 deaths would represent one of these jets crashing every week for an entire year. We wouldn't tolerate that. Most of us, if that was happening, wouldn't get on a plane and fly because of the fear of the frequency with which those deaths are occurring. If we disaggregate that blue overall infant mortality rate data by Black-white race, with the Black infant mortality rate being on the top here, the white infant mortality rate, the red line on the bottom, what we see is a persistence in this gap over a long period of time. And I will remind you of that paragraph made by Sackham, that the persistence of this gap tells us something about our country's commitment to the health and well-being of all mothers, babies, and children. Now let's look briefly at the disparity ratio. Same period of time, Black-white disparity, we see that in 1980, Black babies in the United States died at just over 2 times the rate of white babies. And even though the Black infant mortality rate and the white infant mortality rate improved during the 40-year period that depicted on this slide, we see that the disparity ratio increased, so that in 2019, Black babies died at a bit over 2.5 times the rate of white babies. That occurs in our country because during this period of time, the white infant mortality rate improved at a significantly faster pace than the Black infant mortality rate. If our goal then is to eliminate the disparity, if it's to get rid of the gap, I want to digress for a second to this Running Man slide to make the point. If we want the guy who is behind in this race to catch up to the guy who was in front, and we want to do that, one of the conditions for which we want to achieve that elimination of the gap is not allowing the guy who is in front to slow down so the guy who is in back can catch up, then I think all of us understand and appreciate that in order for that to happen, the guy who is behind has to run faster than the guy who is in front in order to eliminate this gap. Apply that then to infant mortality. If we want to eliminate the gap, the gap between Black-white infant mortality, Native American and white infant mortality, rural versus urban infant mortality, Hispanic versus white infant mortality, then for those groups who are trailing, we have to work harder in those areas in order to improve at a faster pace so that we eliminate the gap. And we have to do it that way without allowing the white infant mortality rate to get worse in order to decrease or eliminate the gap. Because again, we're talking about life and death here. So that we don't want our white infant mortality rate to get worse as we are in the process of eliminating this gap. Now, I've given variations of this talk all over the country, and I can tell you a big portion of what I hear is that the thought of ever striving to improve the rate of survival for, in this case, Black babies at a faster pace than we improve the rate of survival for white babies bothers a lot of people. They complain that doing so would be immoral, unfair, unjust. But look at our own data. We've been doing that for decades in this country, and we behave as if it's normal. And I'm just showing you 40 years worth of data. Look at this information from the National Vital Statistics System, where this is the disparity ratio between Blacks and whites, and how long it's gone on, and how long then we've tolerated this. It's wrong. And we have to make sure that we build the case for helping your jurisdictions, your state, and our country understand this. Now, this next characteristic of the same data set that I want to talk about is what I refer to as a crude survival time lag. You won't find this in the literature. It's something that I've made up. I keep saying I hope to publish it by the end of the next year. I've been saying the end of this year, but it's not going to happen. But here's what I mean by this. And I've done this to help people understand the significance of the disparity ratio, because the way we've been conducting the conversation in this country is we say, oh, Black babies die 2 times the rate of white babies. And then we move on as if that's okay, as if it's normal. And I want you to understand the significance of this disparity. So if we look at our most recent Black infant mortality rate in 2019 of 11 deaths per 1,000 live births, we have to go back 40 years to find a comparable white infant mortality rate. And remember, I've said to you that this is 40 years worth of data so that it depicts a reliable trend in terms of what we've been doing as a nation. Having to go back 40 years suggests to us that unless we change this trend, unless we change this pattern, the United States of America is telling people who look like me that our babies have to wait another 40 years or until the year 2059 to experience the same opportunity of surviving the first year of life as white babies did in 2019. Now, we think that's unfair. We think that's unjust. And we know we can do better. The third characteristic of the same data set that I want to walk you through is how we've done in this country in terms of achieving healthy people goals for infant mortality. You all know about healthy people, so I'm not going to review that with you, but in 1990, our healthy people goals said that by the time we got to 1990, we wanted an overall infant mortality rate of 9, a Black infant mortality rate of 12. As a country, we achieved that overall infant mortality rate for white babies in 1986, well in advance of the goal date. For Healthy People 2000, we said that by the time we got to the year 2000, we wanted to have an overall infant mortality rate of 7, a Black infant mortality rate of 11. We achieved that overall infant mortality rate for white babies in 1992, again, well in advance of the goal date. In 2010, let me go back to Healthy People 2000 to point out that we did achieve a Black infant mortality rate of 11 in 2017, of course, several years after the goal date. For Healthy People 2010, we said that by the time we got to 2010, that we wanted to change some things. That first off, we wanted to eliminate a disparity in our aspirations for surviving the first year of life. So we wanted all groups to experience an infant mortality rate no greater than 4.5 deaths per 1,000 live births. As a nation, we did not achieve that goal for Black or for white babies. For Healthy People 2020, the Healthy People period of time that we've just finished, we said that by the time we got to 2020, we wanted all groups to experience an infant mortality rate no greater than 6 deaths per 1,000 live births. For white babies in the United States of America, we achieved that Healthy People 2020 goal in 1995, again, well in advance of the goal date. So I think you can see that in our country, we've established this racially determined pattern of achieving healthy people infant mortality goals. Based on 40 years of experience, we've achieved those goals for white babies 3 out of the 4 decades, and we did so in advance of the goal date. We've only achieved one of those goals for Black babies, and we did so 17 years after the goal date. So these numbers in the middle of this slide are for me to pose a question to you all. If I ask you to tell me the next number after 2, 4, 6, 8, I think all of you would tell me the next number is 10. If I ask you to tell me the next number after 5, 10, 15, 20, I think all of you would tell me the next number is 25. And you can, beyond any shadow of a doubt, predict to me what that next number is based on the pattern, based on the trend established by the numbers preceding the answer. Well, think about that where infant mortality is concerned. We have well-established patterns, trends based on race that predict the opportunity of surviving the first year of life. And that's wrong. It shouldn't be that way. And so where the Black-white disparity is concerned, we pose these questions. Do Black babies really matter in this country? Or to soften it a bit, do Black babies matter as much as white babies? And while everybody says yes, I don't think our actions support this response. Because even in maternal child health, there are people who believe that the Black infant mortality rate can't improve. There are many who believe that the Black infant mortality rate is as high and as bad as it is because of group level flaws amongst Black people, some of those depicted in the periphery of this slide. And there's essentially nobody that believes that the Black infant mortality rate can ever be the same as the white infant mortality rate. So let's dig in a little deeper as to why these disparities exist. First, let's dispel this myth that the disparities exist because of genetic frailties, because of genetic problems amongst people of color relative to those of us who are white. We have the Genome Project, 20 years of the Genome Project that says to us that genetically, we are 99.9% the same. So that we can't fall back on that genetic excuse anymore. We can't fall back on that excuse that on the basis of race, there is something so significantly different about us that accounts for the occurrence of the racial disparities and the opportunity to survive the first year of life. So now I'm going to concentrate a bit on this concept of stress, which I think in our literature, we sometimes use as a euphemism for a discussion about racism. But what we tell pregnant women today is that if they have experienced a significant amount of stress, and the animations here just are going through the physiologic process that stress creates in the body, not my intent to review that with you this afternoon. But we tell pregnant women today that if they're experiencing a significant amount of stress, that a significant amount of stress places them at increased risk for adverse outcome, that somehow the experience of that stress, if you will, gets under their skin, that it alters their physiology enough that it places them at increased risk for compromised outcome. We also believe that those physiologic changes that occur in the mother are incorporated into the baby, they occur in the baby, and that a significant experience of stress also places the baby at increased risk for compromised outcome. More significantly, or as significantly, we also believe that the experience of the stress that compromises the physiology of the mother and the baby, for the baby that survives that stressful pregnancy, those physiologic changes can be passed on to subsequent generations. And I've given you on the right-hand side of this slide, just brief mention of some bodies of work that help support various components of the conclusions we're coming to on the left side of the slide. Significant stress increases the risk of compromised outcome to the mother, to her fetus, and to the fetus that survives that pregnancy. That fetus can pass on those characteristics to subsequent generations. That's what we tell women for a current pregnancy. Well, I'd like for you to think about that within the context of the African-American experience in this country and what it was like for women to undergo 246 years of slavery and the kind of toxic stress that they were exposed to, followed by another 99 years of Jim Crow. It's only been 57 years since passage of the Civil Rights Act, and I think most of us who are African American would suggest to you that even since then, the playing field has not been fair. It's not been level. Slavery and Jim Crow together to this day account for 86% of the African-American experience. 86% of the time, when we've provided significant advantage to those of us who are white while simultaneously exposing those of us who are Black to significant disadvantage. And that advantage and disadvantage has accumulated over time. But whenever we talk about the racial disparities that occur, not just in infant mortality and maternal mortality, but in poverty rates, home ownership rates, homelessness rates, graduation rates, you name it rates, we never talk about this history. We pretend to be ahistorical. We behave as if, again, the playing field has always been level. And in this country, it's never been level. Now, I do want to make brief mention to American Indians and Alaska Natives. In the previous set of slides that I turned in, your staff at NICHQ reminded me that I needed to talk about other groups as well. And so I've included just a couple of slides that I borrowed from Dr. Warren that will be speaking at your meeting next week. And I encourage all of you to attend this session. But this looks at the population and location transition that occurred amongst Native Americans from 1776. And while the animation portion of the slide is something that I borrowed from Dr. Warren, the embellishments on the left are not Dr. Warren's. I don't want him to get in trouble for me saying some of the things that I say. But these transitions that occurred as a consequence of policies, practices, and systems that were detrimental to one group and simultaneously favoring another group. Those changes were so substantial that it led to the near genocide of Native Americans. So currently, Native Americans account for about 1% of the population of the United States of America. And if we use Dakotas as an example, then this shows you a difference in the life expectancy for whites compared to American Indians in North Dakotas. So that we can see the significant impact of policies, practices, and systems on opportunity to survive. Yet all of us operate under this Declaration of Independence that says to us that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But of course, we live in a country where we're constantly reminded that not all of us benefit from that declaration equitably. I've listed to the left examples of Hurricane Katrina, the increased incidence of killing of unarmed people of color, our country's high incarceration rate of people of color, the voter suppression that is going on nationwide now, specifically aimed, or preferentially aimed, I should say, at people of color, the near genocide of Native Americans, our policies managing the southern border and how that is influencing our Latinx population, and of course, the disparities that we see in maternal and infant morbidity and mortality in our country. The point is that America has worked very hard to keep certain people, certain groups out, to limit opportunities to certain groups. And I've given you some examples of historically how that has occurred. I think all of you have seen variations of this inequality, equality cartoon. I use this one because it helps me to put it within the context of that African-American history that I mentioned earlier. So that, in my opinion, our country is primarily operated in a system of inequality. That 246 years of slavery in 99 years of Jim Crow provided significant advantage to one group while simultaneously exposing another to significant disadvantage. And cartoon-wise, this is how that might look. Since passage of the Civil Rights Act, we behaved as a country as if we were providing equality to everyone, where we provide the same assistance and help to everyone across the board. For those of you who are working on infant mortality projects in your local jurisdictions, think about the Running Man slide and what I've said, because this equality equation won't get us to the elimination of that gap, because the benefit in this case of that 86% of the time that we've provided advantage to whites while simultaneously exposing Black people to disadvantage, that's not eliminated. That's not taken care of by providing the same level of help to all groups, which is why then we push for this notion of equity, where we need to provide more assistance and help to the groups who have been performing most poorly. But equity alone won't correct this, because the system has been designed to preferentially provide assistance and help to another group. So it's equity along with justice that we need, something that corrects that preferential treatment that we've provided to one group relative to another in order for us to eliminate the gap. So up to this point, I try to help people understand that the outcome has been predetermined, and to help convey that concept, I'd like for you to think about the game of Monopoly. And I use this because most people have played Monopoly. So we'll go by the same rules you normally use to play the game, except we're going to augment the rules slightly. We're going to divide into, let's say, 3 groups. The group A begins the game and goes around the board 7 times before the next group B joins in and goes around the board another 7 times before group C joins the game and goes around the board until the game is done. Now, I think all of you understand and know that the likelihood of someone in group C winning the game, even faring well in the game, is not very likely, because each time around the board, people are able to accumulate property and advantage. And if people from another group or another player lands on that property, they have to pay a fine or go to jail. So that there's significant advantage being provided to people who started the game early relative to those who started the game late. Now, those people who started the game early, who were able to accumulate significant advantage, didn't do that because they were better than, more deserving than the people who started the game late. Yet we live in a country where those early starters lift up this false notion of human hierarchy that suggests that they're better than, superior to, more deserving than folks who started the game later. And in that way, the game, the outcome of the game has been predetermined. It's been predetermined by rules, by policies, practices, and systems that we put in place that govern the game. And in so doing, we've set things up so that some of us have more of an opportunity to experience success than others. That means then that the way things have been set up, some of us are at increased risk for failing. This is not normal, and we should be working on trying to change it. So what should we do? First off, we've got to help our country eliminate all the excuses that we make up for why we don't work harder to eliminate the disparities that exist in this country. In my opinion, we have to change the narrative. We have to help people understand that the disparities that exist across the board, not just, again, in infant mortality, but across the board, occur because we made it this way. We designed our country to create the gaps that exist on the basis of race and in some cases in geography. We have to work on achieving equity as our North Star. Now, where infant mortality is concerned and where medical outcomes in general are concerned, the conversation taking place in our country suggests that in fact, we need to achieve health equity, that's what we're making our North Star. And Nancy Krieger reminds us that social inequality kills, that it deprives individuals and communities of a healthy start in life, increases their burden of disability and disease, and brings early death, that poverty and discrimination, inadequate medical care, and violation of human rights all act as powerful determinants of who lives and who dies at what age and with what degree of suffering. So it is my opinion that in fact, equity needs to be our North Star. And as a matter of fact, I don't believe that we can achieve health equity without first achieving equity. So the basic idea here is that socioeconomic position, race, ethnicity, and gender all structure the likelihood of multiple exposures and multiple times because of the way we've structured our country. And this occurs over the entire life course from conception to old age. And it's this lifelong cascade of interacting multiple exposures balanced against available resources that are the important determinants of how social inequalities leave their impact as health disparities. Poverty and race, in my opinion, are intertwined with each making the other worse. And that racism represents a particularly damaging and pervasive exposure. And for the poor, it's the venom in the bite of poverty. It's intricately woven into every domain of American life and has cumulative detrimental effects throughout an individual's life, across all domains, and across generations. In response to the race riots that were occurring in 1967, and this was, of course, after passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, Black people were still complaining all throughout this country about issues of concern. And so President Lyndon Johnson at the time formed what's called the Kerner Commission. And he said, the only genuine long-range solution for what has happened lies in an attack mounted at every level upon the conditions that breed despair and violence. All of us know what those conditions are: ignorance, discrimination, slums, poverty, disease, not enough jobs. And those are the things that at some point we need to address in order to achieve equity. Three pillars that are exceptionally important in terms of the achievement of equity. So we have to value all individuals and populations equally, that we have to recognize and rectify historical injustices, and that we need to provide resources according to need. And of course, that means that we need to address the social determinants. The World Health Organization has told us that these inequalities and inequities occur where people grow, live, work, and age, and that's the place that we need to concentrate our efforts. Where infant mortality is concerned, we've been stuck in this mode of only talking about it in clinical terms: premature birth, congenital anomalies, et cetera. But where the disparities occur, where the differences by race occur in the opportunity to survive the first year of life, it's important for us to help our communities understand that we have to address all the stuff below the waterline in this slide. And if we do not, if our efforts stay concentrated in this boat, then we never figure out what wrecked the boat in the first place. But these are the areas where, from a medical model, we have concentrated our resources and where we have concentrated our programmatic interventions. And part of what we're trying to help you all understand is that there are significant structural factors, policies, and systems that significantly influence our opportunities to survive the first year of life. Now, many of our policies and practices offer temporary help. We figuratively grab a pregnant woman by the hand and we try to escort her around, through, over things that we know could compromise the outcome of her pregnancy. This is an actual map of a family in Los Angeles and the social agencies that family had to deal with in order to address issues of concern in that family. But once any of those issues were resolved, we return families to the same conditions that made them sick in the first place. And that's what we do with women during pregnancy. We provide assistance. Once the pregnancy ends, we return them to the conditions that required our help in the first place. And what a social determinant approach challenges us to do is to eliminate those conditions, to eliminate the obstacles so people don't need that help in the first place. I'm often asked, well, what social determinant do we have to deal with? Because the dominoes in the bottom left are to remind us that each of the determinants is dependent on the other. You start in your community where you can garner the most agreement, the most strength and energy, and that's where you start. But you have to also establish timelines for addressing all of the determinants, because if, for example, someone doesn't graduate from high school, that influences what kind of job they're able to get, the neighborhood they're able to live in, what kind of health insurance they have. The list is long. I think you all understand that. But I'm driving this point home because it's an essential point for us to appreciate and understand in this project. So what you see in the middle of this slide is how many people depict the social determinants: healthcare, access, neighborhood, the community context, economic stability, etc. What I want you to appreciate and understand is that there are structural determinants. Think about the Monopoly game and the order in which groups were able to start. There are structural determinants, the rules, policies, practices, and systems. Those rules determine the social determinants. Those rules determine the conditions that we all live in. And the conditions that we live in have consequences. So look at the line at the top of this slide. There are causes that create conditions. Those conditions have consequences. And we need to operate in the level of causes for long-term positive results. But this is how this whole notion of our zip codes determining our health more than our genetic code comes to be, is because of those causes creating conditions that have consequences that result in diminished life expectancy, a higher infant mortality rate, etc. I don't know how many of you have read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, but in it, she describes a circumstance from this photograph that was taken in 1936 of a group of railroad workers in Nazi Germany who were saluting the Fuhrer. And if you look closely in that circle, there's one guy who's not saluting, who's standing there with his arms crossed, who's not into it like the rest of his peers are. He's the only one in this photograph that seems to understand what we understand now, being on the side of history that we are, about the kind of harm that those policies, practices, and systems put in place by the Nazis were causing the population. The challenge for us now is to figure out where we are in terms of this. And what in part thrills me about being a part of this project is that of the 101 Healthy Start sites, you all represent the 21 that stepped up, that I hope see yourself as this guy with the folded arms in this picture. Barack Obama said to us that change won't come if we wait for some other person or some other time, that we have to be the ones that we've been waiting for, that we are the change that we seek. And so where this infant health equity project is concerned, I hope that in your communities, You are going to be bold enough to draw a line that separates the time that we've tolerated these persistent disparities and that we move on toward achieving equity. Because this is you, where these gaps are concerned. We are the folks that have to stand in the gap, that have to not allow our babies and our mothers to fall through because of the inequities that we've been exposed to for far too long. It means that we have to be very strong advocates, and that our mantra has to be that any baby who takes his or her first breath within the borders of this country is all of our responsibility, and we can and must do better. Gail Christopher has talked to us about a truth and reconciliation that needs to be a part of this if we're ever going to get on the other side of addressing this racism thing. Nelson Mandela's life taught us that it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you all very much. I hope I kind of stayed on time, Nikki. I was trying.
You did a great job. So Ken, I think that we're going to turn it over to you to help us through some group discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Art. It was impressive that you got through that in the time. And again, as I shared in the chat, Art is with us as an SME partner here at the TA and Support Center. So again, as you all move forward, want to have more conversations, deeper conversations, or need other TA connected to him, feel free to reach out to us to make that connection. But thank you again, Art. It was wonderful. So we want to open it up. Just any responses to the presentation, just some things you've heard from Art that you may want to ask now. Just want to give space for that. So just use the, go ahead. I see Anasha, go ahead.
I am just so, I don't even have the word for it, to hear someone articulate something that you've been attempting to understand and to provide that chronology over time with all these slides made the case extremely clear. My question is, Doctor, given what you've shown us, what is the relationship between equity that you gave reference to and justice? What is the relationship between equity, justice, and reparations? How are those things connected, or do you think they're not connected at all?
Oh, I think they're definitely connected. And based on my conversation with the NICHQ staff, I'm hoping that this is a portion of the conversation that we'll be able to get to in subsequent meetings. But think about it for right now like the following. Think about, let's go back to the Running Man slide. And in order to eliminate the gap, we have to provide more help to the person who is behind in order to catch up to the runner who is in front. So think about whatever that additional assistance and help is as a form of reparations, that where Indians who've been forced to reside on reservations are concerned, where Black people have been forced to reside as a consequence of redlining and all the other things in certain areas. We have to assist those communities moving forward, which means we have to provide more assistance and help in those locations. And we have to do that, as I mentioned earlier, without any compromise in our efforts to keep white babies alive. But that you can think about that increased amount of assistance and help as reparations. I had a reparations slide actually in the original deck, but we decided again to leave it out for another conversation. But yes, I do think that they are connected, and I'm so happy that you asked that question, because I think we need to be bold enough to put that on the table, to help people understand That's part of what we're pushing for. And there are some communities who are moving in that direction. If you look at in North Carolina, Ashburg or Ashland, I'm probably getting the name messed up, but their city council has adopted reparations as a way of assisting the Black community get over some of the horrible things that they've been subjected to historically. And there are other communities that are considering similar things. Now, from a fancy medical term we talk about proportionate universalism or targeted universalism. It's another concept that I hope we get to talk about in subsequent conversations. But in essence, what it says is that we need to provide more assistance and help to those communities that have been suffering the most. But at the same time, we provide assistance and help to everybody across the board. You can think about that again as a concept of reparations. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, if I can just take one more moment.
Sure.
All right, real
International-
quick. Go ahead, because we have a short time too, Anaji.
Okay, the International Convention to Eliminate Racism, Discrimination speaks to two aspects: special measures and special rights. That is to say, affirmative action is accepted in the international plane when it comes to disparities. But if we stay inside a civil rights arguments, we won't be able to access the terms and the principles that are already in place. So I'm hoping that some kind of way we can talk about the connection in terms of human rights and the work that we do, because white people have been given affirmative action in terms of the Homestead Act and all these other policies, but when it comes to us, it seems like it doesn't matter. I don't think it's a question of equal rights necessarily or justice. I really think it's a question of equal status. And this is what Dr. Clyde created in his work, his human rights work, because you can, if you don't have equal status inside of that nation state construct, you still will be treated as second-class citizens. So yes, we want equal treatment, and yes, we want these gaps to be filled, but until we get equal status, and we don't have to go back and every 4-8 years to do the voter rights acts again and again, equal status is the question. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment. I agree with you entirely.
So thank you. So that's a great question too that you started with, Anaji. So thank you for that. And for those others that are thinking the same thing, this is certainly a question that I imagine you will be exploring locally, because I think that's important, that as you move your IHE plans, you really will be working with your CANs and your communities. And so these are the kind of conversations that need to be had there, because they need to have the community involved in lifting up that voice to elevate it to this higher level. So I think it's great that it's come up here, but I would hope also that you're taking that back to your CANs and having those conversations on the ground, because they're really, really critical, as we've heard, even in the responses. So thank you so much for kicking it off, Ananje. Is there anyone else that has a comment or question before we move on? Feel free to use the chat as well. And I can't see, did someone come off? I heard a bell. It could have been in my head too. Anyone else? All right, great. But let it continue to marinate. Again, you'll have access to these webinars recordings, so you'll be able to review that presentation in the PDF form as well. All right, let's move on, Nikki. So just really quickly, again, one or two people can offer some conversation here, but we wanted just to check in with you all. And I just wanted to emphasize, just from the presentation earlier, Art really, I think, again, set a great ground, laid the foundation for the work that you're embarking on over these next few months. But we just wanted to check in with you to see if you've had any conversations with your CAN on any of the things that were brought up during the presentation. What conversations have you had? Anyone want to share an experience you've had since last we've met and the conversation you've had with your Community Action Network members? Is there anyone? We'll let you off the hook this time. We'll just want to prepare you for our next webinar. Part of these webinars are opportunities for you all to share with one another. And so you will have significant time in the next webinar. So definitely be prepared to come and share and talk, because others can learn from what you're doing in between in the conversation that you are having on the ground. So we'll let you slide this time. Let's go to the next slide. So as you think about some of the topics, issues that we've been raised, the challenges even from the presentation, does anyone have a thought on what it's going to take to advance these conversations? And so a couple of points were made, having these conversations at a national level, but is there anyone that could speak to this? What do you think it's going to take to really advance these conversations and having the right conversations? Anyone? So if you all wouldn't mind, I'm going to take the liberty. Marsha, people that I know, I'm going to pick on because I can ask for forgiveness. But Marsha, you have any thoughts? Because I know that you've been a part of Healthy Start for some time now. What have you seen, and what do you think it's going to take for us to really achieve equity, just from your perspective, advancing these types of conversations? Marsha Davis, in case there's a second Marsha out there.
So was that ask for forgiveness later?
Yes.
Well, I think the presentation was really good. And I think, it has already been said with having those real conversations with our CAN, and just bringing people to the table that can help us to push the needle. Just making sure that we are, I think just what you said, having those real conversations, I know a lot of times, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. James, a lot of times we only go so far, we only touch the surface of things. And so now we're going to have to push forward and go beyond surface level and really have those real conversations and try to figure out the next move, how to move that needle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marsha. I appreciate that. And I'm just going to pick on another friend that I'll call, because I know the work that they're doing on the ground. And Carol Gagliano has added a lot of value to this work over the years, not just with Healthy Start, but I know in her community and the center where she works. But Carol, do you have any thoughts that you would add, as well as really having these conversations, true conversations?
Hi, everyone. Ken, we will talk later.
I know.
Okay. Well, and Sharon can jump in on this too, but we already talked about this earlier, but this is hard work. It's difficult because a lot of times people have not been given space to be truthful or to even have an open conversation with people of different ethnic groups. And on our CAN, we have people from all different races and ethnicities. And when we start these conversations, it's quiet. The room is quiet. And when sometimes we have to engage people, but we always use things like, this is a safe space. This is a opportunity to be honest and truthful, because if we don't get there, if we don't allow this opportunity to start getting to the core of people's thinking and their biases, we can't really get anywhere. We have to get through that piece of it before we can move to talking about what the issues are and what some of the solutions are. So having those open, honest conversations about our biases, about our thoughts about each other, has been an important part. Even though it takes time and you feel like it's taking time away from the work that you want to get to, like the actual action planning, but it needs to happen. That part needs to happen. Sharon, do you want to add more?
Yes. Wow. So Ken, and then Carol says, I'm going to put Sharon out here now. No, but just to add on to what Carol said, we look at this as, this is the part of what we call having courageous conversations around as we say, put the spotlight back on you, start with you, and then let's move forward. Let's do a lot of reflecting on what we know about what hasn't been done, let's look at what the numbers are showing, just like what the presentation showed earlier. It's horrible to think about the fact that we are still talking about this in 2021, and we have not made the progress that we feel like we really should have made. But again, it is really unfortunate to say this, until the incident with George Floyd, these diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations have not been on the forefront. Well, now they are. And this is the time to take action, even though that happened almost a year ago. But still, it's created a synergy to have those kind of conversations at this point and go in and feel safe. Not a place where it's not a place for attacking. It really is a place for communicating and having a group there. As Carol said, we prompt the conversations by allowing people to know this is a safe place to ask what you don't know or to ask what you're uncomfortable with. This is a safe spot to do it.
Yeah, thanks.
Sharon, talk about the word clouds.
Mhm.
Oh yes. So we had an exercise where I think it came up with maybe 7 questions for people to think about in terms of race, in terms of stereotypes, in terms of inequity, in terms of things that where they viewed from their own cultural lens. And we got all of the information back. Like we send it to them in an email because we know that during these times, sometimes we have silence. We sent the information back. We sent the information out, and everyone had to send that information to us. From that, we created a word cloud. And then when we had the conversation came from the word cloud. So everybody could be anonymous, but then the dialogue was, these were the comments and the statements that the collective made. So let's talk about these. And so it was really good because, I mean, oh my God, we got so much more information than we actually thought we were going to get. And then we created the word cloud in a heart to show that this was all about love. This was not about attacking or anything, but it was very useful and people felt very comfortable because though they sent their information in, we were the facilitators of the conversation. And because we were the facilitators, they felt comfortable because they didn't have to say it. But then every once in a while, people would jump in. And that's because the comfort level was there and the room was safe to have these kind of dialogues.
Well, thank you both. I didn't know we were gonna get so much, but I mean, we got strategy, idea, the word cloud. I'm sure folks can take that idea. And as Carol said, really, we have to get to the core of these conversations. And so creating ways to do that. And Sharon just came back and just added those things and the opportunity that Sharon mentioned that these conversations, they're now on the forefront. And so this is the opportunity to really, again, as Art emphasized, the power of these IHE projects to really move this forward is incredible. So thank all of you, all 3 of you. And we have one more that I want to take, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, but Lucia Palmerini.
Hi, it's Lucia Palmerini. So I work with an organization in Cincinnati called Queens Village, and we are working with 5 rivers to hold listening circles across the state using the Queens Village model. So I just want to share a little bit about the Queens Village model, which is from our view, our perspective on how we can advance these conversations and change the media. Step 1 is put Black women in charge. Let them lead. And we've done that in Cincinnati by our white executive directors, this is the director of our diversity, equity, inclusion programs. She is a Black woman. She's going to lead these efforts. She's in charge. And having people get behind her and support her and be clear about that she's the respected figure there. The second part is listening to Black women, really asking those questions, listening to them, asking them what they need and what the solutions are in their community, and then giving them the resources and getting out the way. So really that's our 4-step model is put Black women in charge, ask them what they want, give them the resources, and then let them do it. And there's lots of efforts that Queens Village undertakes that involves allies. I myself am a white woman that works with the organization, and we involve allies and in many different ways, from Black men to medical providers to non-Black women to Latina women. But sort of because, as we know, this whole presentation, this is an issue that affects Black women and babies. We know that that is the focus and that is the center. So when we work with allies, we're having those conversations about how can you support Black women in this fight. So that's just what I wanted to share about our work and our simple 4-step plan for changing the world.
Well, thank you, Lucia, and that was great. And again, more resources offered for this group. And so thank you, thanks Sharon, Kara, and Marsha. We're gonna go ahead and move on. And I also want to acknowledge a colleague that's out there among this group and a resource for you all. I just know his work over the years, but Peter Schaefer, I haven't seen or heard from Peter in many, many years, but he was around in the original, when Healthy Start started, working in Baltimore. And I know that he is an awesome evaluator and has great, great experience. And so just wanted to give him a shout out, Peter. I would love to connect at some point. So let's talk about the environmental scan and just giving you an overview, because again, you all are experienced Healthy Start programs. You're running a full Healthy Start program, and this is an opportunity to really focus on infant health equity in your community action networks. And so again, we know that you're looking at lots of different tools and you're doing lots of things. And so we've, again, from viewing your applications, creating profiles, and hearing from you the last time, we want to just provide an overview as you're embarking on your environmental scan. So let's go to the next slide. So here's the word cloud that was created. We asked last time, what words come to mind when you think about environmental scan? And so thank you, Sharon, for the plug about word clouds, because they're really helpful to use. But this, again, represents the collective. And these are some of the things that came out as we all contributed to building this word cloud. And so this kind of assessment, the research, the collaboration, the transparency, partners, momentum, these are great, great words to keep in mind as you embark on the environmental scan. So before we do that, we want to take ask a couple of questions and use the poll everywhere. And so the first question we wanted to ask, does your project have a consultant on board to actually conduct the environmental scan? And so let's just go ahead and answer. And if you don't have ability to use the poll everywhere, use the chat just to answer yes or no if you're using a consultant that you brought on board with your supplement to actually conduct the environmental scan. So what are we looking like as a group? Again, if you need the instructions, there at the top of the slide, just to get onto poll everywhere. And again, if you cannot, then feel free to use the chat if you've brought on a consultant to actually do your environmental scan. Give a few more seconds for folks as well.
Ken, it looks like the chat is disabled.
Oh, all right, I'll ask my staff to look into that. So if it's disabled at this time, if you want to just come off mute and just say yes or no, we'll have an idea too, just to keep things moving. I'm not sure what's going on with the chat, but we'll try to figure that out.
Hey, Ken, this is Tamika. We have a consultant on board to help us with our environmental scan in Chicago.
Okay, thank you.
And in Jacksonville, we have one as well.
Okay.
So with that, she's actually.
Okay. Right. So I got Chicago and Jacksonville, yes. Okay. And just looking at our poll, the majority of folks actually have a consultant on board, which is great. Okay. All right, let's go to the next question. In Newark, no. Okay, thank you, Sheila. So have you started it? So has the consultant or your project started your environmental scan? Just a quick yes or no. Okay, thank you, Sheila. Pending. That's a good answer too. Great. Hal, thank you, Hal. Pending. All right, so good. There's a few that haven't. Go ahead, Tamika. You're coming off. Okay. All right, thank you all for taking time with that. Thank you, Marsha, pending as well. So great. So what we'll do again was we definitely assumed that you all had already started on this and have great experience. And so we'll just highlight some things as an overview and then make some emphasis based on action plans that we're reviewing that will be part of the template that you're going to get next month based on, again, your applications, where folks are, the communities that you represent. We kind of have gone through some of the tools and plans that are out there to kind of pull out the best and emphasize things for this infant health equity group in particular. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead into the presentation test. Thank you. So again, we know environmental scanning is this process, again, that systematically surveys and interprets relevant data, identify these external opportunities and threats that could influence your future decision. Next. So when you think of the environmental scanning approach, there's some things, and I just put them as like check boxes. So checklists, as you're embarking on that plan, you're working with an external consultant that's working with your group and putting things together, just some things to think about, and we'll make some suggestions of some tools that folks use. But again, having that concept of the environmental scan is important. Again, making sure you talked about the different factors and elements of the environmental scan, understanding the need for the environmental scan, because again, this is important then as you communicate to your community, the role, the purpose, et cetera, and then your approaches. And so again, having conversations, perhaps you've already did some convening as you prepare for your environmental scan, but the approaches that you've taken, identifying sources of information, and those 3 levels we talked about: systematic, ad hoc, process form. You've already been doing that. And then analyzing the methods and techniques that you're using. Again, we know SWOT analysis are part of environmental scans. And I don't know if you've heard of SOAR analysis, but we'll just make a mention of that, and also the Pastel analysis, and then root cause analysis. There's some great recent work out there on root cause analysis that we can share with you in case you don't know. And again, we've done a lot of the searching, so you don't have to. So we'll just, again, highlight just something about the root cause analysis. And we have tools that'll be part of resources for you later as well. Go on to the next slide. And you can go to the next one. That's just definitions of those. So why environmental scan is critical. You go ahead and populate the slide for me, Tess. So I'm going to take a few minutes and go ahead and play that. Is it playing? I don't hear the volume. So this is just a short video. I think that captures a lot of important information about environmental scans. And so
Dalquist is an
there you go. Perfect. Go right ahead. I'll shut up.
hour away. I can't take that much time off work.
Since I got laid off last month, I felt so stressed. I need to provide for my kids, but no one is hiring. I don't know what to do.
I used to know every single person that lived on my block. Now I don't even recognize the place. There's just no sense of community anymore.
When we talk about how to maintain our mental and physical health, we often focus on things like eating healthy and going to the doctor. But our health isn't just affected by the choices we make, it's impacted by our environment. The conditions in which people are born, grow, work, play, learn, and worship are called social determinants of health. Social determinants of health can be visualized as a river with 2 categories of determinants: upstream factors and downstream factors. Upstream factors occur at the systemic level. Examples include institutional discrimination and accessibility of education, employment, housing, healthy foods, and quality health care. Downstream factors are specific to individuals. Examples include employment status, level of education, and aspects of identity such as gender, race, and disability status. Just as building a dam upstream impacts the flow of a river downstream, upstream social determinants directly affect downstream ones. Consider race. In and of itself, race does not impact health. Rather, systemic racism leads to consequences like less access to employment and education, which in turn negatively impact health. To begin to recognize the relationship between social factors and health, consider these statistics. Suicide rates are highest in the Western American states and in Appalachian regions. Non-Hispanic Black individuals have the shortest life expectancy of any racial group, and the mortality rate of Black infants is more than double that of white infants. And as compared to people with an annual family income of $100,000 or higher, people with a family income of $35,000 or lower are 5.4 times more likely to experience serious psychological distress, but 10.6 times more likely to go without needed care due to cost. Tackling the social determinants of health, especially the upstream factors, can seem like a huge task, but we can all make a difference by advocating for change in our own communities. A good place to start is with the U.S. Healthy People website. This site has stated goals related to social determinants, which are aimed at improving the following. 1. Access to jobs, food, and housing. 2. Access to education. 3. Community connectedness and inclusion. 4. Access to health care and health literacy. And 5. Neighborhood safety and housing quality. Throughout this process, remember that systemic issues impact individuals differently, that people are the experts of their own lives, and that social structures won't change overnight. But with empathy and sustained effort, we can better the health of everyone.
Thank you, Tess. So I thought that was a really great clip because I know it aligned with Art's presentation and really aligned with where we are and where you are as a community action network and moving your program. And again, it's another data source out there that you might want to think about aligning with the Healthy People 2030 goals, as this is this Health Equity 2030 under the MCH plan. So go right ahead to the next slide, Tess. Thank you. And so again, when we look at Wheeler and Hunger's description of environmental scan, it's about monitoring, it's about evaluation, it's about dissemination of this information from the external and internal environments to key constituents in your communities. Next slide. Populate this for me, it'd be quicker. So making the connection with your needs assessment, as we talked about last week, and it's emphasized in the NOFO, the needs assessment was critical, and all of you have done that, and now you're moving on to your environmental scan. And many of the successful action plans that are out there, some of the case examples we gave you, there's a connection between the needs assessment and the environmental scan. So as you're starting out and working with these consultants, it's important to understand how they connect and then support the action plan that you're going to create, and the benefits of this needs assessment to the environmental scan. Again, improving that alignment and integration and effectiveness of the systems level efforts. Also, it is important because it helps identify those gaps, and the needs assessment helps identify these gaps in existing services and access resource capacity, identifying risks and protective factors, and then strengthening existing partnerships, and then also identifying new and expanded opportunities. It also is helpful in building support between program partners and others in the public and private sector, and then also helpful as you engage that multi-sector cross stakeholders, including families and everyone in your community. Next slide. So as we think about that, compiling the data on risk and protective factors, as well as assets. So just again, these are things to think about in case you haven't. And again, as you've started, most folks are, but just thinking about the risk factors and protective factors, as well as those assets. And those, again, risk factors are the measurable characteristic that can be associated with a negative problematic outcomes. And so again, we've seen how Art laid it out earlier as well. Protective factors are these resources within individual, family, and community that are associated with lower likelihood of those negative problematic outcomes. And so it's just important to consider those and having those clearly articulated. Go ahead and populate for me. And when you think about protective factors, the assets are connected to those. And assets, again, useful, valuable, whether it's equality, whether it's in people or things that provide advantages or resources. And then also assets that are at the public level, private level, and nonprofit level. So again, as you do your community mapping and knowing what resources are there, those could be some assets there. And then any physical assets as well, whether it be land, housing, etc. Next slide. Go ahead and populate for us just to help. Again, with the needs assessment, determine the risk and protective factors as assets does help identify those gaps, but it's also important then to align that assessment with those risk factors in the population. And as with you've already done with the needs assessment, be sure to review a variety of data sources and from those systems, various systems, to ensure that you have that comprehensive view of what the needs are in the community. And that's very important as you go into your environmental scanning. In addition, reviewing the qualitative and quantitative data related to those risk and protective factors and community needs. And again, if data doesn't exist in the community, this is where you can consider getting data other ways, perhaps hosting a focus group with different stakeholders to get their perspectives. As we heard from the video, you heard from Dr. James, it's important to engage the people impacted by the problem for the solutions. Next slide. Go ahead and populate this slide as well. As you things to keep in mind, so gather that data for the needs assessment, but again, as with the needs assessment, your environmental scan should identify those existing resources in the community that address the indicators of the population and subpopulation. And key steps that experts encourage you to consider is to document those resources, describe the funding streams that are supporting those existing resources, identifying policies and procedures, and also identifying technology resources, and describe the systems change and integration activities. These are key elements that are kind of consistent from a lot of the experts that do environmental scans. Next slide. And again, just some resources that we got from Mind Tools. And when you get the presentation, we put a hyperlink on the logo. So when you click on Mind Tools, it'll take you right to the SWOT analysis. But many people are familiar with the SWOT analysis, which is the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so again, that's a big part of environmental scans. And so you'll have that. And if you don't have a tool, we just have one there for you. Next slide. And many people are familiar with the SWOT analysis, but then moving into a TOES analysis, that TOES matrix, again, another tool for generating strategic options as well. But again, using what you've done with the SWOT analysis, it really moves you to action. And so as you think about this assessing and evaluation assessment, you're able to then think about different strategies that may go into your action plan. And so looking at them together, and there are certain questions that help you think through that to come up with some strategic options. And so SWOT and then moving to TOES. Again, if you click on the icon, you'll definitely be able to connect right to the tool that's there if you don't have one already. But Mind Tools is a great resource. Next slide. SOAR analysis. I don't know if many folks are familiar with that, but it's strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. Again, after you've done these earlier assessments, analysis, you can really kind of do kind of a strengths inquiry, kind of on the internal level, and then appreciative inquiry as well. That's what the SOAR analysis helps you do, but it's good to do in combination with some of the others. And they're quick tools that are useful and helpful in communities. Next slide. And the PASTEL analysis, which is looking at political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So again, as we talk about looking at that systemic, that structural level, this is a great analysis that many people use as well. So that's available in case you haven't heard of it. You certainly can check it out, the PASTEL analysis. Next slide. And again, with the PASTEL analysis, just some tips here as far as its useful tips. Make sure it's collaborative, use expertise and resources that are available within the organization. So that's again, kind of maximizing, leveraging what you have. And again, as I said, this is a great analysis to use in connection with SWOTs or SOARs or some of the other competitor analysis that you may be using. And the encouragement there is not to get bogged down on collecting vast amounts of detailed information without analyzing, understanding your findings appropriately. So that just makes me think of just being smart. Don't move too fast, but make sure you're pausing to make sure that everyone's understanding and agreeing that you're moving in the right direction. Next slide. So an environmental scan is basically the strategic analysis that you're engaged in. It's going to give you an assessment of internal and external, and again, that's strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And again, using other tools, you get even deeper information, but strengths are building and enhancing. Weaknesses, you to look at those, examine those so you can resolve or reduce them. Opportunities, how do we maximize, exploit these, expand these, and then threats, things you want to avoid, and coming up with plans or strategic action that you avoid make those things. And then just put a small icon there just to talk about the micro level and then that kind of macro level when it comes to the environmental scan. So really pushing your consultants to make sure that you're addressing those social determinants and really getting to that outer realm is really important as you look at this environmental scan for this project. Next slide. Go ahead and populate. So in environmental scanning, it's really about what we see today. And so you're seeking this information. And as you're doing the environmental scan, it's going to lead to the strategic thinking, like what happens in the future, and it starts generating options there. And then it also, the environmental scan helps you go and move into strategic decision making, like where will we go in the future? And so you're making decisions about what it's going to take to do that. And then environmental scanning also takes you into strategic planning. What will we do today? And that takes us right to then creating this action plan. And so it's just important to understand really what is the purpose, what is the need of environmental scanning, and how to use that in connection with your needs assessment, which you've already done. And then how do we now move into creating those action plans? Next, please, next slide. And go ahead and populate that. And just again, for some, it may be introducing you to root cause analysis. As we're talking about really addressing those social determinants and looking at the root causes, there are great resources and again, tools out there that helps communities connect root cause analysis, which is really this process of discovering those root cause of problems in order to identify the appropriate solutions. Okay, go on to next slide. And these are just quick considerations I'll point to as we're wrapping up, because you'll have this as a resource. But again, you all have asked for case studies and examples. And so these are just some, and we're highlighting a few things here. So this is a Safe Schools project, toolkit that they created, but they have this cycle of strategic planning process that you kind of repeat. So that's just something good to check out. Go on to the next slide. And we'll plow right through these tests. Another consideration, this is a great report that I've checked out, recent report, Understanding the Facets of Poverty, really if you're addressing equity. And so it's just a great resource. Keep going, unmasking. So this is a actual video that we plopped in for you already. So again, quick 5 minutes on what root cause analysis is. Let's keep going.
There are different explanations.
Oh, no, you won't play it. And this is really, nope, yeah, right, thank you. This is a great resource that I want to highlight because they've done incredible work in Memphis, Tennessee. And I was excited about this because it's something I've watched for a while because I was born in Memphis. And so again, this process that you're in, Memphis, Tennessee have done that, and they have this great plan that they're implementing. They're having great success. And they also have, as part of that, a root cause analysis framework that they have. And so again, the icons are actually hyperlinks, and so you can check those out as well. Keep going for me. Thanks, Tess. And life course theory, fill that up. Again, we know at Healthy Start, we talk about life course. And so AmChip has a great toolkit they have on that, and click again. And there's two other examples of looking at how does life course get integrated into environmental scanning and leads to community action plans. So again, resources are there. Go on, Tess, please. Another, some work that's done in DC Network of Care. Again, integration of that life course into creating their community plan. Go on again. Another project in Florida, and our colleagues that are part of this network. There's great work that's done there in Florida with this ecological model of health. Go on, next slide. And I think this is the last one. Click one more time. This is another great resource because this is a foundation that also engaged in the same type of process we are with the IHEs and really developing a plan, but they created an equity framework. And then that framework shows up in their plan as equity, results, and alignment. And so again, these are some tools that pretty much have done what we're embarking on as the IHEs. And so I wanted to make sure we provide those for you as well as you're embarking on your environmental scan, and especially working with those consultants, helps you think about things that you want to consider as they're putting those environmental scan plans together. And next slide. And I think that was pretty much it. So thank you for my short time today. And I say, let's keep the momentum going. All right, off to you, Nikki.
Great, thanks so much, Ken. So I think that we have a breakout exercise set up for the participants. So Tess, next slide. So we're going to break you up into groups, I believe, of 3 or 4 people, and we'd like you to discuss the following questions. So what approaches and strategies are you using for your environmental scan? And what data do you hope to gather or collect as part of your environmental scan? So we'll take a pause. Anyone have any questions about that before we jump into rooms and assign you? Okay, Tess, I think we're all set if you want to send everyone off into their rooms, and we're going to give you, I believe, 10 to 15 minutes. We'll see how it goes, but we'll call you back into the room when it's time.
All right, I'm going to open the rooms now, and you should all be automatically directed. Thanks.
Okay, great. So Tess, can you actually go up and just put those 2 questions back up for us all? So we'd love to hear from any of the groups in your breakout session. Were there things that resonated here? What approaches or strategies did you share? We've got maybe just 5 minutes to do this, so would love to hear from you. We've got a quiet group this afternoon. Is there anything new you learned in these groups? Anything you're going to steal from somebody else?
I do want to quickly mention geomapping as a tool to visualize data for CAN members. That's something I got from my group, and I thought it would be extremely helpful to convey data and help CAN members visualize disparities. That's sometimes hard to understand with just words and numbers.
Yeah, Adrian, I would just add to that too. Part of that geomapping, you can do like heat mapping. I know that's people have been doing that for years as well, but adding that layer as well as you're doing the geomapping. Mapping out certain diseases from whether infant mortality, asthma, and all kinds of things. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other approaches or strategies folks want to raise up? Or different data you'll be gathering?
Does anyone have a unique way that you're engaging people with lived experience, or how you really bring in community members and sharing data that comes at that level? Anybody doing anything unique or creative there?
Mika, go ahead.
And go. Hopefully you guys can hear my voice. I'm hoarse. It is football season. So some of the approaches we're using in Chicago, actually it's a collaboration of 4 Healthy Start projects. Right now we are attempting to collect all of our information of all our stakeholders based upon each one of our Healthy Start sites, looking at our existing data for the Healthy Start program to see where our gaps are at, to set the foundation for our environmental scan. Our consultant who is leading those efforts is already pulling some other infant mortality, just data from the city of Chicago and Cook County, doing a higher level scan. And we're also training our participants that will be supporting the Infant Health Equity Action Plan development. We're going to use our leadership series that is part of our Healthy Start initiative to train participants on how to use their voice at the table. So that's something that we're doing. We've expanded that service from our Healthy Start project to the other Healthy Start projects. So that training will be taking place in the next couple of weeks or so, because we plan to have our first kickoff meeting in December, our larger community forum. So.
Yeah, I would just add, and that's working with Tamla Milan Alexander on
Yes.
that seat. And so again, she's working with the TA Center. So if folks are interested in really this consumer leadership series that Tamika is referring to, it's really, Tamla's been talking about it all over the country. And so we definitely be working with her. If you're interested in that training for your site, let us know. We can connect you with Tamla as well.
Okay, so I'm not going to force anybody else to speak here, but we are going to encourage you all to go on the collab. We'll kind of touch on this as we go through our final slides here, but we want these conversations to continue. You don't just have to talk on these webinars, you can talk to each other on that platform. So Tess, I'll turn it over to you to run us through kind of our next steps and just reminders for the group.
Thanks, Nikki. All right. So in terms of next steps, first, we're just going to pop up a quick satisfaction survey for you all to take while we're going through these next steps, just on this webinar today to help us plan for our future webinars in this series. All right, so that should have popped up on your screen. You can just work on that. It's about 6 questions, so just make sure you scroll down and get them all. All right, so we saw this last time at our kickoff meeting. This is our TA and Support Center activities timeline. So throughout this whole process, we're really encouraging you when needed to really, seek out one-on-one TA from our team. We're working with a group of fabulous subject matter experts who will be able to really assist you in this project. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything we can do to support you. Also, as Nikki said, we really like to push you to that collab workspace to have conversations with one another, maybe share resources, just use that place as a space to connect between these meetings that we'll have. So this is our October monthly webinar. We have monthly webinars in November, December. We'll also have some drop-in sessions. It'll be with subject matter experts. So again, there's more opportunities to provide more information for you guys and also to have time for questions as well. And then we'll move into our action plan reviews, our action plan refining meetings, and showcase eventually a bit later on in the process. In terms of our collab page, again, a great place to connect with one another, share your tools, ask questions, really just engage with one another in between the webinars and drop-ins. We'd ask that you consider introducing yourself and the work that you're doing on this platform. You can just make a comment up there and introduce yourself or ask a question. Just so you all know, all project directors do have a collab account and you were added to this group. If you have any trouble accessing the platform or this group in particular, please feel free to shoot us an email. And if you would like to add any additional staff to the collab group or our email distribution lists for this group, please have your project director email us at healthystart@nichq.org. Any other questions about this can go there as well. Next, so our next session will be actually next week at our grantees meeting. We're hosting a networking cafe during lunchtime. It's an optional session for you all, but if possible, we'd love for you all to hop on, connect with one another. Again, it's an informal meeting time where you can speak with one another, bring up challenges you're facing, resources for one another, all of that, just some time to connect. And Melody will be leading that session as well, I believe. Next official webinar will be on action plan templates. So we are working with a consultant to summarize your applications. And based on those summary documents, we're really creating a very customized action plan template for you all. So it's really, like I said, going to be based on your applications and the content in there. So that next webinar is going to be taking place on Wednesday, November 17th from 2 to 4. You should all have that calendar invite, which has the registration link. Again, if you need to receive that again, just feel free to email us at healthystart@nichq.org. All right, and before we finish up, Nikki, Ken, Melody, any additional comments?
No, just want to thank everyone for being here. I know it's another packed agenda, so hope that you got something that you can take away with you to help you on your journey. Melody, anything else on your end?
Just want to echo what you shared, and then also thank everyone for their participation. I know it was a lot to ask for, 2 hours of your time. So I'm hoping that these 2 hours were well spent for you and you learned a lot and are excited and motivated to get to the next step of your planning process. So thank you.
Thanks, Melody. All right, so it looks like we just have a couple folks to finish up the satisfaction survey. So if you could just do that before you leave, that would be awesome. Otherwise, thank you all so much for coming today and joining us. So it was a great session and we really look forward to seeing you next time and hopefully soon at our grantees meeting next week. So everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, y'all too.
Thank you.
Thank you.